we go to the 19th century, which we'll completely skip because Soviet Union. Wait, what the hell? Wait, sorry, wrong cut. What the hell? Sorry, people. No, I'm not a communist. I just got these in Berlin because I really like the color red. Sorry, wait, we were talking about London, not Moscow. Sorry, anyways, we're back to the other country we're actually talking about, the United Kingdom. We now enter the 19th century, Britain's golden century. Now, there are a few timelines I've thought of here. One is the Industrial Revolution, the Industrial Age for Britain between around 1750 to around 1970. The second one is the Victorian era, which, if you want to be really precise, from 1837 to 1901, which is the rule of Queen Victoria, right in the middle of Britain's golden age. And finally, this, at least in my opinion, Britain's golden age, ranging from 1815 to 1914, almost a century. And we will explain, well, I will explain why I think this timeline is very appropriate and why I think Britain had a full century of mostly complete dominance during most of the 19th century and into the 20th. London itself was also growing. It was right in the middle of the largest empire in human history. And from 1800 to 1900, its population went from 1 billion people to almost 7 million people, becoming the world's first megacity in human history. As I said earlier, Britain heavily dominated most of the 19th and early 20th centuries. Only in the latter half of the 19th century would countries like the German Reich and America start to challenge Britain in economic and industrial dominance and status. Britain had the largest empire in the world, and the reason why I put the dates 1815 to 1914 was because 1815 was the end of the Napoleonic Wars, where Britain became the undisputed superpower, at least in my opinion. France was destroyed by war, Spain lost its empire over the next few years, and Britain, which had two huge rivals that they had fought multiple wars with over the past century, they were now mostly obsolete and gone, at least in the colonial world. Now, the reason why I chose 1914 as the end date, because World War I heavily shattered the British Empire. But it did not break the empire, and only after World War II did the British Empire start crumbling and falling apart, as all empires eventually do. That's why if I had to say the golden age of the largest empire in human history, I will say those dates to you. In 1789, the Bastille in Paris was stormed and destroyed. The year 1789 was the start of the French Revolution. This eventually evolved into the French Revolutionary Wars, where many of the monarchs against Europe tried to destroy this new republic. And eventually the Napoleonic Wars came afterward. Britain, along with Russia and Austria, were the three largest powers in the coalition that fought many wars against the French and eventually Napoleon's regime itself. Eventually, Prussia also joined the coalition. I think there were like 6 or 7 wars of the coalition. Like, oh my god, they so badly wanted to kill the monarchy. It was like, no, we can't have a republic. We don't like the French. Kill the French. They fought so many wars, and in the end, from 1803 to 1815, the Napoleonic Wars raged on. One of the most famous naval battles of the Napoleonic Wars was the Battle of Trafalgar, where Nelson, the British Admiral Nelson defeated the French and Spanish fleets off the coast of Spain. This became known as the Battle of Trafalgar and cemented British naval dominance until the years leading up to World War I. The rivalry between Britain and France was like the elephant and whale in many different terms. Britannia was the master of the seas, and Napoleon's Grande Armée blitzkrieged Europe, well, before the actual Germans did, gave it to him. But anyways, Napoleon's Grande Armée destroyed and took over and subjugated Prussia, Austria. They created the Confederation of the Rhine. They took over modern-day Germany, the Netherlands. They subjugated Italy. They went into Scandinavia. They invaded Russia. They got bogged down in Vietnam, Iberia, and so on and so forth. So in many ways, the rival between the British and French empires, which had already been going on for more than a century earlier, was known as the whale versus the elephant, and this was especially true in the Napoleonic Wars. Anyways, by 1815, when the Battle of Waterloo happened, where Wellington, Duke of Wellington, not Admiral Nelson, he unfortunately died during the Battle of Trafalgar, and he is commemorated in the Trafalgar Square, which is very close to Britain's huge administrative area in modern-day Westminster. But anyways, back to the topic. The Duke of Wellington defeated Napoleon along with the Prussian General Blücher in 1815 at the Battle of Waterloo in the fake country, real country of Belgium. I love calling countries fake. I love the fake country of Canada. Now, as I have said many times earlier, Britain came to dominate the rest of the 19th century after the Napoleonic Wars because, as I had said earlier, France and Spain were heavily destroyed and damaged by the Napoleonic Wars, and it was kind of a huge break in the British-French rivalry, which had gone back all the way to the medieval era. And after the amount of wars that the British, French, and Spanish have fought against each other in the previous century and beyond as well, whether it be religious wars or wars of colonial expansion, and we only talked about one of these wars right now in this video, which was the 7 Years' War, which is by far the most famous. But many other wars were also fought between Protestant Britain and Catholic France and Spain. They were huge rivals. So this made Britain a huge, pretty much, how do I say it? Not just dominant, unchallenged colonial empire for most of the rest of the century. Now, why did Britain become the huge industrial power that we've known throughout the 19th and 20th centuries? The reason for that is it was the first country to be host to the Industrial Revolution. As I said earlier in the video, from 1750 to around 1970 was the industrial era for Britain. From coal mining to cotton and textiles, Britain was the first industrialized country, truly industrialized country in the world, and that's why London became the first mega city. Now, one example that really pushed the Industrial Revolution in Britain forward was the improvements in the steam engine by James Watt in the late 18th century. The steam engine was by far one of the most important things for the Industrial Revolution, creating a combustion engine. You could use this in factories and so many other things, and eventually in the invention of trains and the railroad system, which was actually the fastest way to travel on land even before the invention of the automobile. Britain spearheaded with many different areas taking different things, taking different industries. For example, Manchester became famous for textile weaving with proper textile machines. Other parts of the country did coal mining, and there were so many things, and this helped Britain elevate themselves to the largest industrial power in the world. And by far the two most important materials and minerals for industrialization that a country needed to have was coal and iron. Eventually, steel, which was much better and was less seducible to rust compared to regular cast iron. The way they made steel more cheaper to be made was through the Bessemer process, which was created in the 1850s. This made iron another huge important mineral along with coal during the Industrial Revolution. And countries like Britain and Germany that had huge reserves of these, well, now not anymore after more than 100 years of these countries being industrialized and using these mineral deposits. Countries like Germany and Britain and many others around the world had coal and iron ore, and these countries used it to their ability. For example, in Germany, one of the most industrialized areas in the world was the Rhineland and the Ruhr valleys, where there were huge coal and iron mineral fields. Now, that was the first reason for Britain being able to become a superpower. The second reason was the fact that Britain had a huge empire. When I said Manchester became a huge textile area, the reason for that was not because Manchester produced cotton. It's because they sourced cotton from the American South and other places like India. As a matter of fact, because of the American Civil War, and during that time, the US, the Union, blocked cotton exports to Britain from the south. Britain ended up importing cotton from India, and that's why the city of Bombay, today called Mumbai, which is today India's largest city, was actually started to become a huge city and a city of importance for the British and eventually modern day India because of that. That is an example of how economics and markets can shift economies, and this is also now into the 19th century we can really see not just private companies and chartered companies, colonialization, and maybe Canadians eating beavers, but also you really start to see the global market we see today and that we so easily take advantage of. Britain was a huge player in this globalization in a lot of ways. Even though it did not fully properly happen until after the Second World War, it still facilitated a huge amount of trade. And Britain, as I said earlier, had an empire to source materials from territories like Canada, India, South Africa, Australia, for prisoners, of course. What the hell's in Australia except kangaroos that want to kill you? Okay, well, Australia, New Zealand, and so many other places. Britain had a huge empire, and especially places like India and Canada, these were very useful places to source resources from. This enabled Britain to get a lot of resources that wouldn't have been able to be produced in Britain, such as cotton for textiles. I'm going to introduce you to my best friend, I mean my favorite history book. I've learned so much from this book. It is History of the World, map by map, and they have many beautiful maps. Like, look at this, dynasties of communist China, that was. See, Great Depression, the wars, conflicts, and even industrialization. This is the map in this book that we're going to be focusing on, industrial Britain. So here you can see that mainly England is industrialized, but the red areas are coal fields. So before the Bessemer process was invented, where it made steel cheaper to make, over here as you can see 1856, Bessemer process was invented to make steel cheaper. But other than that, before that, in the decades leading up to it, like starting in the 1750s when England started to industrialize, coal was by far the most important material. And you can see in the red areas, these are all coal fields. And you can see many of Britain's biggest cities like Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle, and even in Scotland, Glasgow and Edinburgh, and even down in Wales, Cardiff, these are in coal mining areas. In general, the southeast, which is where London is, didn't have a lot of this. So London wasn't really a huge industrial area, more so a financial one, as I've been explaining in this video. But here you can see a lot of highlights here. For example, down here, wrought iron produced for the first time. So there are advancements in the production of iron. And then, of course, if you go up here, you'll see a lot more ones. See, Duke of Bridgewater Canal, England's first canal. So with the industrialization and a lot of steam-powered engines and whatnot, they're able to dig canals. And of course, here even more strives of innovation throughout the iron and even coal industries. If you can see here, by 1850, coal production increases by tenfold from just a century ago, which is pretty short in historical terms. If you go all the way here, the first proper steamboat was created over here in Scotland. And there are so many other things. I don't think I can cover them all. But one highlight I want to make out is Robert Stephenson's company, locomotive company. If you go down here all the way to the bottom of the map, you can see a train engine he called Rocket in 1829. And if I'm not mistaken, in the same year, and also I think this is the precise engine, the first railway line was opened somewhere between Liverpool and Manchester. I think maybe directly between Liverpool and Manchester, somewhere in this region. It was the first railway line in human history, and I think in 1829 it was created. Another example of innovation, look here, 1779. This is like right after, during the American Revolutionary War, as a matter of fact, the first cast iron bridge is constructed. So a lot of strides with coal, iron, steel, and even textiles. You can see a lot of textiles and also tasty sheep, except in this case they're being used to represent wool, even though I'd like to eat every single one of them. A lot of different industries are colliding together in Britain with innovation, big empire, and as you can see here, Liverpool becomes a major port due to cotton imports from the US South and eventually places like India, which is why Bombay within India became a huge city in a large part due to cotton imports and also general trade that the British want to spread throughout their empire. And with the beginning of this kind of revolution with textiles and like mutton, you get to more and more economic growth, and Britain subsequently, with a combination of industrialization decades before the continent and America, and also a combination with its empire, it's able to become the superpower of the world. London was the first mega city in the world, a huge part due to industrialization and causing people to move from the countryside into the city because there were more jobs and factory jobs specifically. Now, London was the first city, one of the first cities in human history to really deal with a lot of urban problems huge cities today experience. Now, very few cities throughout history before the Industrial Revolution went above 1 million people. very few cities. Cities that were the center of huge empires that had their mark in history, such as the Roman Empire or the Song dynasty of China. Those types of cities, which were very few in number, went even above 1 million people. So, the fact that London increased by around 6 million people within just 1 century, when you compare to the rest of human history before that, is completely unprecedented. And after that as well, cities like Delhi and Tokyo having more than 30 million people in their metropolitan area is even more insane. Just how the human population has grown and how industrialization has facilitated such a huge number of humans to come into this earth only within the last 2 centuries. Now, London was being the first mega city and industrialized city in the world properly was not. Now, other cities earlier in history had to deal with urban problems many cities go through today, but London, having a lot of modern technology come into it, such as sewage or water systems or electricity grids, something which we in a lot of modern cities take for granted, was completely revolutionary even just 100 years ago, having running water within your own house. So London was kind of a huge experimental ground and a huge city, one of the first in the world, to really deal with a lot of these urban problems. So we're going to mention 3 of these urban problems and how 19th century London solved them. Now, they did not do everything perfectly. Not everything is perfect. Like, for example, London had huge amounts of pollution even into the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. So, let's see how London solved 3 problems, even if they were temporarily solutions. For most of human history, most cities have barely had an organized sewage system, and the same was for many huge cities that were sprawling like London and Paris. Now, London was very similar. Most cities along rivers used to dump their sewage into the river. That's why even to this day, certain rivers like the Thames or Seine in London and Paris are still a bit polluted even to this day. Now, London, being a huge industrial city, spewed out plenty of pollution, aerial and water pollution as well. And in 1858, the pollution in the River Thames got so bad there was a period known as the Great Stink. In response to this, a man named Joseph Bazalgette was put in charge of creating the first organized sewage system in the world. He ended up creating a sewage system with hundreds of kilometers, if not thousands of kilometers, long pipes across the entire city of London. Well, not city of London, the entire area of London. And it was one of the largest engineering breakthroughs of the century, and it was the first modern organized sewage system in the world. And eventually this would also bring organization into the electric grid, and even today, where the newest utility of all is internet, all of this, it may be very basic, very functional, but it still is very interesting to see the engineering behind how these systems work. The next one is slums. Today, in cities all over the developing world, such as cities in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Philippines, and many other places, you see a lot of slums. I personally have gone to cities like Bombay and Delhi, and I've seen a lot of slums. Very crowded housing places, very crowded, very dirty, and I've seen open sewers in a lot of these cities that I've been to. And London was no exception. Because of such a huge population explosion, slums were common all over growing European cities like London and Paris. But we're here to talk about London. I'm not a French nationalist. London, most of London's slums were destroyed after World War II, actually, because the Blitzkrieg of London, where Nazi Germany ended up bombing London. So in the end, most slums were actually demolished during that period. And this is something that's actually much later. We're getting a bit ahead of ourselves in terms of the timeline. But it's very interesting because after World War II, a lot of social housing projects came in. A lot of them may have failed, but some of them actually succeeded, which shows that sometimes social housing can be done right, such as in countries like Austria or in cities like Vienna. But let's not get us ahead of ourselves to the 1940s and 50s. During the Victorian era, efforts were also made to try and help the poor and people living in slums. One of the most famous examples was the Salvation Army, founded by William Booth in the East End of London, which was much poorer than, say, the West End and the posh areas such as Mayfair or Westminster. The Salvation Army works even today as a huge charity organization that operates across the world. London, being the first megacity in the world, struggled with traffic even before the invention of the automobile. And in 1868, in response, the first metro system in human history was created, known by its nickname, the Underground. By 1900, the Underground had a sprawling network all across the city of London, and during both World War I and World War II, especially during the Blitz of World War II, it was used as an underground bombing shelter because of its huge, vast network. Today, the London Underground is one of the largest in the world, with one of the largest lengths in pure railroads and also one of the largest systems in the world. Today, it expands across literally the entire metropolitan area of London and was a huge blueprint for many more metropolitan areas to create their own metros in the coming future. Now, since we talked about the underground, let's go into more depth about railways. Before the mass production of automobiles in the early 1900s, railways were the fastest mode of land transportation throughout most of the century. And the largest reason for London growing outward with such huge suburban growth and growing so far away from the major city, which is called suburban sprawl, and a lot of people associate suburban sprawl for cars, like how we see happening in the United States in most US cities. But London suburban sprawl happened, at least for majority portion of the time we'll be talking about, it happened due to railways and the underground. Now, railways were a key player in transportation and even mobilization of armies. One example of how railways heavily determined the fate of wars was during the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871, where the Prussians, or the German Confederation at this point, united, first of all, yes, did unite against the French because no one likes the French, but number two, one thing that really helped them beat the French, which was a full unified country versus their confederation, one thing that really helped them was they were able to mobilize their troops and send them by railways. This eventually helped the Prussian and later on German army to hit Paris and beat France and show those Frenchies how you get it done. They didn't get beat by the Brits. Even the Germans don't like them. Even the Italians don't like. Even the Spanish. No one likes the French. Okay. Anyways, but as you can see, railways, whoever controlled the railways and used railways more efficiently could mobilize soldiers faster, which means they could also deploy troops faster and fight wars faster. Slowly, throughout the 19th century, war was becoming more and more industrialized. And later in the video, we'll see how World War I took this to horrifying scales of industrialized killing and warfare. But the good part of railways, other than literally mass mobilizing troops to, beat up the French because we don't like their cheese, anyways, it was good for transportation. As I said earlier, this was able to facilitate the first mega city in the world to grow far outside of its original medieval walls, beyond from kilometers to kilometers on end. This connected cities and grew economy a lot. And one thing that really helped it was the Bessemer process, which made making steel cheaper because steel was less susceptible to rust, unlike regular cast iron. The Industrial Revolution progressed and empires grew and industrialization sped up more and more. Eventually, by the late 1800s, countries like the German Reich and America were starting to outpace America in economic growth and industrialization. Germany is a very good example of this in Europe, and America also was eventually catching on to becoming a huge industrial nation. Many beautiful buildings were being built during the Victorian era. The most famous example is the Houses of Parliament and Big Ben. Close by to it is a street called Whitehall, and many government buildings such as the Royal Admiralty and Wellington Barracks are also located there. That road leads up to Trafalgar Square, and also eventually close by is Buckingham Palace and Hyde Park. One of the most famous examples of how Britain showed the grandness and greatness of the British Empire was during the World Exhibition of 1858, where they built the Crystal Palace. Unfortunately, they destroyed it and you can't see it today, but it was a spectacle to behold. So here I am on Google Earth, my favorite app on a computer, and here we're going to see London. So here is London, this is Westminster, and this is the city of London. So Ignore those skyscrapers, they suck. So here is St. Paul's Cathedral, but let me specifically explain what I just explained over here on the west end. So just before that, the east end is here, and as you can see there, the docklands, and this leads to the river, which eventually leads outside. And a lot of these suburbs did exist during the Victorian era, as you can see, thanks to railways and the underground. Like, I can literally see a railway line right here. Anyways, back to the west end, and one more thing about the railway. See, a lot of railways here, over here, train stations. There's this beautiful train station here as well, St. Pancras, right here. Yeah, this is St. Pancras. This is King's Cross Station. So yeah, these people are train-aholics. Remember that. Now, here is this perspective of what I just talked about. This is the Palace of Westminster and Big Ben over here. This is Westminster Abbey. Now, down here is Westminster Cathedral, another beautiful Neo-Byzantine cathedral. This is Buckingham Palace, the royal residence. Let me just tilt it this way. There's Buckingham Palace. St. James Palace is somewhere here on the side. And this was where the Crystal Palace was, somewhere in Hyde Park. Now, where was the street Whitehall? Here, this is Whitehall. This street right here going down, leading to Trafalgar Square. Now, this is pretty much like, once again, the National Mall for them. Many buildings on the side. Scotland Yard, head of the London Police, is over here. There's some weird communist building over here. Well, it's the Ministry of Defense, actually. These are one of the most beautiful buildings. The Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, and this, the Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. There are a lot of beautiful government buildings here, including this, which I think is called the Admiralty. I wish we could show footage from this that we'd actually taken in real life, but I haven't been to London in a while, and I don't remember being to London because I was very tiny. In 1888, London was finally created. In 1888, the County of London was finally created. Before, London was actually technically and politically divided between different counties such as Essex and a lot of other ones which were from the medieval era. This was very outdated since a city with over 7 million people had just popped out of nowhere. I mean, not nowhere, over centuries. So in 1888, the County of London was formed, and eventually in 1900, that was furthermore split into 28 metropolitan boroughs. This will not be the last time London will politically reorganize, though. The British Empire has left a huge mark on the world, and today so many countries around the world, such as in India with a huge population, has a large English-speaking population as well. As a matter of fact, I think there are more English speakers in India than Britain, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand combined. I'm guessing, I'm not sure, but even then it's around the same number. And a lot of other huge countries in the world today have a lot of English speakers. Now, today in our modern world, the United States has become a superpower, which has also even furthermore spread the use of English. But the British Empire was still a huge stepping stone to have the massive English-speaking world we have today. Think of it: when you see media all around the world, a lot of it is actually English, and other large languages like Mandarin is very regional, or like other large languages like Mandarin or even Spanish are kind of regional and set in certain regions, like Mandarin in China and Spanish in regions like Central America and South America. So English has truly become, by far to this day, the undisputed, completely global language that you can speak from North America to Oceania. The British Empire's legacy is everlasting even today with its crappy borders. With the crappy borders they made. Like, seriously, there are a lot of crappy borders from India and Pakistan to Israel and Palestine. A lot of borders that this empire has drawn up, and a lot of conflicts are happening today. This has happened throughout history, very common with when empires break, when huge empires break and dissolve. Most recently, the Soviet Union that broke up to this day have a lot of border conflicts. The same happened with the British Empire, and the same has happened with many other large empires like the Romans and the Mongols. It's something you're going to expect when empires get destroyed. But stay on the video. We're not done with the British Empire yet. Not yet. Now we enter the early 1900s, where Britain is starting to be challenged by Germany and America and other countries as well, like France as well, in terms of colonialism. Actually, during the 1880s and 1890s, Africa was basically completely gobbled up by Britain, France, Germany, and so many other European powers. Even the little Belgians decided to get one colony in. But now, a lot of tension had been boiling up over a century. Europe had not seen a war in almost a huge major war that engulfed the entire continent in almost a century. And in 1914, after many conflicts and disputes with the Russians, the Habsburg Austrians, and the Ottomans within the Balkan region, it eventually exploded after the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne was assassinated by a Serbian nationalist, Gavrilo Princip. He was assassinated in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia is Sarajevo. That's how you say it. He was assassinated in Sarajevo, I think in June or July of 1914, and thus the First World War kicked off due to a series of alliances. Russia came to the alliance, to Austria wanted to declare war on Serbia, which they did due to the fact they accused the Serbian government of being responsible for the assassination of a royal Habsburg heir. Russia joined the Serbians, the German Reich joined the Austrians. Germany then proceeded to declare war on France because France was an ally with Russia. Later on, Germany tried to surpass French defenses by attacking Belgium, neutral Belgium, which then triggered the British Empire, and now we got Britain, France, and Russia versus Germany and Austria-Hungary, and eventually the Ottoman Empire would also join in as well. Many other countries in the middle, such as Bulgaria, Romania, and Belgium, would be in the war, but this World War was, as I said earlier, an absolutely catastrophic display of the industrial warfare that had been coming up for many years. A lot of generals were thinking like it was the Napoleonic Wars in a lot of different ways. Some countries like Russia were still using cavalry during that era, which proved very disastrous. Battles like Tannenberg, Verdun, and the Somme were very disastrous. As a matter of fact, the first day of the Battle of the Somme, which was a British assault against the Germans to relieve different offenses across the war, they lost more than 30,000 soldiers in one day. The absolute horrific industrial and human scale cost that World War I showed, it showed that an era had gone by. The era of the famous Napoleonic cavalry charges and so many other things, that era had gone by with faster shooting rifles, the dreadnought era of naval warfare, better artillery, machine guns, chemical warfare, and many other things. This was an absolutely boiling point because Europe had not had a huge war. Like, basically every century or so, or maybe like every 50 years or so, all the European great powers decided to come, hey, we haven't killed each other in a while, let's go do yay! Like there, it's insane. Every single century there's an excuse to fight another big war. In the 1700s it was the 7 Years' War, in the 1800s it was the Napoleonic Wars, and in the 1900s it was not one but two world wars that struck the European empires down eventually. The British Empire was heavily damaged by this, and after such costly battles like the Gallipoli campaigns, the Eastern Front, Western Front, battles like the Somme, Verdun, Tannenberg, Masurian Lakes, the world was completely devastated and changed forever. Out of the empires that went into the war, the Ottoman Empire was destroyed, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was fractured and destroyed, the German Reich was destroyed and replaced with the Weimar Republic, much weaker, and also much land was taken from the German Reich, well, not the Reich anymore. The Russian Empire was destroyed and engulfed in a few more years of the Russian Civil War and the Bolshevik Revolution, even after World War I. The British and French empires were heavily damaged and destroyed, and even during World War II, you can see that Britain and France had been much more weakened even at that time, and the American Soviets took a huge load during World War II. The British Golden Era, from 1815 to 1914. After World War I, the British Empire was never the same again, and during the interwar period, countries like Egypt and even Ireland seceded from the British Empire. And even before World War II, Britain started giving Commonwealth status to different countries. Like even before World War I, they gave the Commonwealth status to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and a few others. One very important one that they didn't give Commonwealth status to was India, which was still directly ruled by the British Crown and like the British Raj. And India, being the largest British colony and also the jewel in the crown, was very important. World War I not only introduced industrial scale warfare, but it also introduced a kind of trade choke point. During World War I, the Suez Canal was under threat. Suez Canal was built in the late 1800s, and was a very vital corridor for Britain to access not only the Iranian oil fields but the jewel in the crown, India, rather than sailing all around Africa. So during World War I, you could see another form of modern warfare that was starting to appear, a form of trade embargoes and tariffs and trying to block other people from trading with others. And this is before the full-on globalization of the world economy after World War II. Between the interwar periods, London's suburbs grew rapidly. Semi-detached housing and terraced housing dominated these suburbs, and many people started moving to them. In 1939, London's population hit its all-time peak of 8.6 million people. Causes for decline are many, but one of the earliest ones was the start of World War II and the German Luftwaffe's blitz of London City. London's huge underground network, bus network, and even tram networks enabled London to grow out in such a huge suburban sprawl. Also, more and more people started to own cars, as during the 1920s, Ford created the T model. I think that's what it's called. And this enabled the first mass production of cars in history. And so throughout the interwar period, before World War II, you really start to see more and more people owning cars, even regular people, after this huge mass production of cars starts happening. And after the post-war period, more and more highway infrastructure starts to get developed, and now we get to today's world where there are highways in most countries. London and Britain, like most of the world, was hit very hard during the Great Depression between 1929 to 1939, which was the start of World War II. During this era, many extremist parties, such as the Nazis in Germany and the fascists in Italy, started to gain popularity. Similar things were happening within Britain as well. The Communist Party of Britain and the British Union of Fascists, I don't remember their names, but basically communist and fascist parties started to gain traction within Britain. And in 1936, many hostilities culminated in the Battle of Cable Street, which was a huge multiple clashes in one day between the police and many other different groups. Since 1868, when the first underground system in the world opened in London, multiple different companies had been competing not only in metros but also in buses and trams. In 1933, a man named Herbert Morrison united all of these fraction companies into one single board, today known as London Transport. Herbert Morrison also introduced the Metropolitan Green Belt, which went around London and around its suburbs to try and prevent London from going too far outward. He also worked to destroy slums and build more public facilities like schools and hospitals. From 1939 to 1945, World War II took place. And for a decent part of the war, Britain was pretty much the only outlier that was still fighting Nazi Germany until the Germans invaded the Soviet Union. France was overrun in like 2 weeks, and so was most of Europe. So Britain was pretty much the only one defending against Adolf Hitler's regime. And as a result, the Wehrmacht Luftwaffe, which is their air force, started to bomb Britain, but especially London. Almost around 30,000 Londoners died during what is known as the Blitz. During this time, children were evacuated to the countryside and civilians hid in London's huge underground network. In late 1945, one air raid became known as the Second Great Fire of London. It caused a huge firestorm which engulfed most of the city of London. St. Paul's Cathedral, however, remained relatively unscathed and became a famous symbol of Britain not kneeling down to Nazi Germany. In the beginning of World War II, Britain and its allies suffered a huge defeat. The Germans ended up encircling Britain, the British Expeditionary Force, and also among France's best armies in Dunkirk. The British were able to evacuate their soldiers back to Britain. In the meantime, France ended up falling to the Germans. Winston Churchill later said a speech, and I quote, "We shall fight in the beaches, we shall fight in the landing fields, we shall fight in the fields and the streets and the hills. We shall never surrender." That was a part of Winston Churchill's speech, which became very famous during that time. Now, in the end, Britain and its allies, after the intervention of America and also the Eastern Front fighting with the Soviet Union, in the end, they were able to defeat Nazi Germany. World War II was the last fatal blow to the British Empire. In the next 2 decades, the British Empire will lose almost all of its colonies, and one of the first to leave was India and Pakistan, which got partitioned and got independence in 1947. Today, though, there's a league called the Commonwealth of Nations, and many former countries that were part of the British Empire, like India, Canada, and Australia, are a part of that Commonwealth of Nations. And to this day, countries like Canada and Australia recognize the monarchy of Britain as their head of state, which is kind of weird because, like, how is it the head of state? Don't they have their own parliaments? And also, really funny, why does Australia and New Zealand have the British flag on it? Like, what? Even Canada used to have the British flag. Like what the? Oh my god. After World War II, Britain had to answer its housing shortage problem. During World War II, tens of thousands of buildings were destroyed in London alone. And in response, Britain, as much of the rest of Europe, started to build apartment blocks and flats. The Soviet Union went all in on this, once housing the entire population of modern day Italy in some of these housing blocks, also known as commie blocks. But anyways, the devastation of World War II caused the push to create more public housing and more apartment buildings and more flats. Many of these projects failed. One example that didn't fail was a project called the Barbican, which today you can see right in the center, close to the city of London. The 1960s was characterized by the counterculture of the youth against traditionalist values. During this time, many rock bands such as the Beatles and Rolling Stones, and later on other bands like Queen and Led Zeppelin, came out during this time, and it was known as the British Invasion. The Beatles became especially famous, and they ended up becoming popular all across the world and still are to this day. From the 1950s onwards into the coming decades, more and more immigrants, especially from countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and also West Indian countries like Jamaica, all of who like cricket by the way, started coming to Britain, and to also show those Brits that you invented cricket, but you never won the World Cup. You won 2019 World Cup. Now listen here, the Brits invented cricket, and I'm surprised I've not talked about cricket yet. They also invented football, not soccer. The stupid Americans, they call it soccer, and they call their fake wrestling game football. Why do they call it football? I've had this problem. But anyways, cricket's the greatest sport. All of us know it's the greatest sport. And yeah, basically the reason why, do you want to know the biggest reason why London is full of Indians and like Pakistanis, like Jamaicans? You know why? Because they want to show Britain, you've not won any World Cups. India won 2, West Indies won 2, Australia, they won 6. Why did we lose the last World Cup to Australia? Okay, anyways, out of my cricket mania, why did we lose the World Cup? Anyways, out of my cricket mania, oh my god. During the 1970s, in the 1980s, and even 1990s, the Troubles, which came from Northern Ireland, started to spark, and the IRA started doing terrorist attacks across Britain and in London. Ireland had got independence during the 1920s, but Northern Ireland, which was heavily Protestant and originally mostly ancestrally from places like Scotland and were Presbyterian, is that how you say it? Basically, some Protestant denomination, and because of that, a couple counties which made up Ulster decided to stay with Britain. This caused a lot of tensions between the Catholic Republic of Ireland and the Protestant Ulster counties, also known as Northern Ireland today. In 1965, since then, London had been growing vastly over the past few decades, ever since, not decades, more than a century, it had been growing insanely. And in 1965, the Greater London Metropolitan Area was created. And hey, they have a cool headquarters just across the river from Westminster Palace. But anyways, that happened, and 32 boroughs were created. And this is the modern shape of the London Metropolitan Area today. Starting in the 1970s, thanks to Margaret Thatcher's rule as Prime Minister, Britain started to deindustrialize. One example within London itself was the Docklands on the East End. They couldn't accommodate large modern container ships, and like many other industrial areas across the country, it started to become abandoned and run down. During deindustrialization, it helped certain parts of the country, but it heavily destroyed economies in other parts of the country. As Britain started to move towards finance in the latter half of the century and into the 21st century, London benefited greatly. And as I've said already so many times in this full London series, London is the second largest financial center only after New York City. So, certain many parts of the country, such as in the north, in places like Manchester, Birmingham, a lot of these huge cities that had mainly were small villages before the Industrial Revolution but had sprawled into among the biggest in Britain, started to decline after deindustrialization. Into the 1980s and 1990s, the Docklands area, which there's a part of it called the Isle of Dogs. What are these names? Anyways, the Docklands area today has become offices and tower blocks, and if you think downtowns are areas with groups of skyscrapers, then technically it's kind of a second downtown with the second most notable area of skyscrapers other than the city of London. After the post-war period, because so many historical buildings were destroyed, unfortunately, many buildings in London, especially the city of London, modernized. And today, you can see, at least in my opinion, these awful, ugly, disgusting looking skyscrapers. And yeah, they ruined their skyline, as you can see back there. St. Paul's Cathedral used to dominate London's skyline, and today it's all these big, fat skyscrapers. Yeah, they're fat. At the start of the 21st century, London created the Millennium Dome close to Greenwich to symbolize the beginning of the new century. By the way, I actually forgot to mention this. Greenwich is where the prime meridian runs to. I forgot to mention that in the video as a part of my full monument montage of talking about. Greenwich is actually where the prime meridian runs to because every empire wants to be at the center of the world. Britain, being the most recent one pretty much, is at the center of the world. That's where the prime meridian runs, north to south. It's right at Greenwich, where the Royal Observatory is. In 2012, the year I was born, London hosted the Olympics with Mr. Bean in it, Rowan Atkinson. I think that was the coolest part of the 2012 Olympics. Otherwise, I don't know what else to say. I've never been interested in the Olympics. I don't know, they just do a bunch of jumpy things and call it sports. In 2016, Britain, in Brexit, left the European Union, and this only marginally weakened London's position as a huge financial centre, but it did put a few roadblocks with making business more easy to do with Europe. Now, the British Empire may have ended a few decades ago, well, officially in 1997 when they transferred Hong Kong to China, but I don't believe that. I believe it ended earlier. But the British Empire may have been gone, and as all empires do, their golden era falls. And if you count the Soviet Union as an empire, that as well. The British and Soviet Union and Soviet empires within the last century have fallen, and they have left crappy borders behind, but also, unfortunately, modern conflicts that continue to this day. But if you ever go to Britain, remember, when you play their lovely sport of cricket, which India and Australia are best at, by the way, and you drink their most English tea straight from Assam and Sri Lanka, and when you go to the British Museum, seeing all the lovely British artifacts from all over the world, from Egypt to India, you can remember how British Britain... Okay, fine. Okay, I'll stop it. If you ever do visit Britain, though, well, I visited Britain, and I remember going to the British Museum. Other than that, I don't remember anything else, because I was too small. But being an absolute urban planning psycho, I do love the way London is planned. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you for watching my full rant about history, because I really love history and architecture, and when you fuse it together, wow, you get me here, the psycho of the video. But thank you so much for watching, and see you in a future episode.